Well, welcome to the fourth in our Winter E-Power series through the Center for Excellence in Aging and Health at UNE. I'm Tom Muser. I'm the director of the center, and I'm pleased to have many of our legacy scholars and other new friends, students from UNE, faculty and staff, and others joining us on Facebook today. This conversation has been long in the making, but it's an exciting one. Our center is emphasizing intergenerational exchange is especially important this year. And during the pandemic, I think we've had a lot of distractions with respect to the climate and climate change and in general environmental change. And now's, I think, a good time to regroup on that topic. And I'm really thrilled to welcome our legacy scholars and students who will share their perspectives on these issues across generations today. I'm also grateful to our co-sponsor for this program, our Office of Sustainability at UNE, and especially Alitha Caridi, who I'm going to turn the floor over to now and who's going to lead us for the rest of this conversation. Welcome.
Thanks, Tom. Good afternoon and welcome to everyone. I really just want to say a big thank you for joining us. My name is Alitha Caridi, and I'm the Assistant Director of Sustainability here at the University of New England. With UNE's robust academic programs, all of our research initiatives, and of course our tagline of innovation for a healthier planet, we are uniquely well positioned to collaborate across disciplines to bridge our environmental and health science programs and to enhance the education, research, and community partnership. Today's event will illustrate one such partnership, and we are so pleased to have you all here to explore the intergenerational connections that surround climate change, environmental stewardship, and sustainability. When Tom reached out to me last fall to ask if I would collaborate on bringing together some UNE legacy scholars and some of our undergraduate students to engage in dialogue around climate change, I was really excited by the opportunity. We have a nice engaging group of individuals that I'm super happy to be with them today. I'm going to share real quickly our outline for today. So we're going to do some brief introductions of all of our panelists because we have several of them. It's a mix of UNE legacy scholars and undergraduate students. And then we have some, the panelist discussion, we're going to talk a little bit about past experiences, present, current views, and future hopes and visions for the future. And then we're going to open it up for the last 20 minutes for some audience participation. And that's where you'll have an opportunity in the chat function to weigh in on the conversation, perhaps ask a couple of questions for panelists, or provide your own thoughts, comments on things that they might have had to say. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Reggie to start the introductions, and we're just going to let each panelist introduce themselves. So Reggie.
Thank you, Alitha. I'm thrilled to be here and excited to see so many of you. My name is Reggie Robnett, and I'm the Associate Director of the Center for Excellence in Aging and Health. And I will be monitoring the chat if you have any questions. And I'm going to be assisted by Kelly Abrams. Wave, Kelly. She didn't want to talk, so wave. And we're excited to see you all here. Thank you for coming. Next, I will turn it over to Nancy Jenkins, one of our esteemed panelists.
All right.
There you go.
Thanks. My name is Nancy Harman Jenkins, and I am a food writer, food journalist, and food historian. And I am a very old Mainer going back multi-generations. So I've been putting a lot of time into Maine and the environment. Next up is Maggie, who's a student.
Hello, I'm Maggie. I am a sophomore nursing student here at UNE. I've been working as an eco rep with Alitha for a little over a year now, and I'm excited to be able to talk to everyone. Up next is Lydia.
Hi everyone, thank you for coming. My name is Lydia Pinard. I am a junior oceanography student with minors in applied mathematics and climate change studies, and I have been doing research on the warming of the Gulf of Maine since the fall of my freshman year. I will hand it over to Dr. David Mochler.
Hi everyone, I'm David Mochler, Professor Emeritus from the University of New England. I have been involved with environmental issues since the 60s, which dates me just a little bit. It's great to be here. I have a lot of connections with the Maine Sierra Club and National Sierra Club, and I've worked with them for many years. And I'm going to turn it over to Maureen.
Hi, I'm Maureen O'Donnell. I'm a legacy scholar. I'm retired from telecommunications and teaching. I live in Biddeford for just about 4 years now. I'm originally from Chicago. And the last person to introduce herself will be Tori.
Hi, my name is Tori. I'm a senior marine affairs and environmental studies double major here at UNE, and I'm also a lifelong Mainer.
Wonderful. Thank you all very much for introducing yourselves. We have an important topic for discussion, and I'm really looking forward to hearing the intergenerational perspectives. And so I wanted to invite two of our panelists to talk first about what shaped their current attitudes regarding climate change and environmental stewardship. So like, what were the early experiences that drew you to climate action and sustainability, and sort of that evolutionary process that brought you into the conversation today? And perhaps Nancy could answer this question first, and then Maggie provide sort of the Gen Z perspective after Nancy does.
Well, thanks, Alethea. When something is as present in a person's mind as global climate change is in mine, it's very hard to pinpoint a time or an event when that began, when I woke up, so to speak. But I'm going to try to, by remembering a very dramatic talk given to a sellout crowd at the Camden Opera House, probably in the late 1940s or early 1950s. The speaker was Commodore Donald McMillan, a famous Arctic explorer with very strong Maine roots. Donald McMillan was a Bowdoin graduate, and he was commander of the schooner Bowdoin that had been built in East Boothbay specifically for McMillan's Arctic explorations. And in that talk in Camden, which was probably based on his most recent trip north, McMillan addressed what was not then called climate change, but what he had observed. He had a very dramatic voice, and his voice filled that small town hall as he intoned, "The glaciers are melting and the seas are rising, and slowly, slowly, inch by inch, the waters will rise to cover this little town." Wow. It certainly made me sit up and pay attention. And a lot of other people in that room too, I think. McMillan, he didn't know why the glaciers were melting and the seas were rising, but he was clearly on to something. And today we know so much more about fossil fuel consumption and rising temperatures and ocean acidification and climate change. We know about the effects of forest fires raging in Australia and California. And we know about the sweep of intense cold and snow in regions that are not used to it. Are we ready for it? No, not at all. We're no more ready than the Californians were for those terrible fires, or the Texans were most recently for the awful cold and snow that swept over them. Now, I have spent most of my career writing about food, why we eat what we eat, where it comes from, and what's the best use of it to sustain healthy human cultures. I want to show you a slide. Alethea, can you put that slide up for me, please? This is a fascinating chart. This comes from a site called ourworldindata.org, and it shows what I've come to see more and more, that even though the environment has an impact on our food, food has a huge impact on the environment, whether it's how food is grown, raised, and harvested, how it is processed and packaged, or how it gets to the consumer, usually by very long distance transport. The food sector accounts, as you can see from the chart, for more than a quarter of all greenhouse gas emissions. And if you look at the right-hand side of the chart, you will see that livestock and fisheries, which are probably our favorite foods, make up almost a third of that total. These are stunning figures. So I spend a lot of time these days thinking about how to mitigate all of this, how to get the earth back to a more sustainable state, and how to do that without, frankly, creating even more economic and social disruption than we suffer right now. And food figures very largely in that picture. Maybe we need to stop buying out of season strawberries raised in the Southern Hemisphere and shipped to us by plane or boat or whatever. Or maybe we need to stop eating so much meat. Maybe we need to give up meat altogether. Maybe we should focus more on locally grown. I'm not sure of the answer. I'm not sure if any of these will provide an answer, or if all of them together will provide an answer. But I'm hoping that through talking and talking in groups like this, through questioning and prodding and exploring, we might come up with some answers that will help us to get it right before it's too late. Maggie, I'll turn this over to you so you can give us a student perspective on this.
Thank you. Unlike Nancy, I did have a pretty stark, this is when I realized I want to be involved with sustainability and environmental issues, and that was coming to college. Before college, I knew I wanted to go into healthcare, so environmental issues were always like kind of on the back burner, and like I would hear about marches and protests and like in seeing the news. But it was when I came to college and started working as an eco rep that I was able to see, like, on our campus, we have a very well-designed recycling and composting program. And I work with the recycling program. And it was just kind of crazy to see how much waste we still have, even though we have these like programs in place. So we have food waste being reused, and our recycling is, we try to sort it as best we can, but there's still so much waste going into like the compactor and then being sent off to the incinerator. So that was one of the main things that made me see this is something that needs to be addressed. And so I'm trying to learn more through programs like this and talks, and I'm hoping to be able to fit more environmental classes into a health-based education program. And I think that is like an issue that should be addressed, that if you're not an environmental science major or an environmental issues major, it's very hard to be able to take classes and learn about these issues, especially if you aren't part of like eco reps. I don't know if I'd be able to be aware of like talks like this. So I think just being able to have it get out into the community and make it more accessible for people to learn how to change their everyday lives to become more sustainable, I think that that's one of the main issues that should be addressed.
Thank you, Maggie and Nancy. Nancy, that was a great introduction. And Maggie, I find it very interesting that that you're headed into the health professions, and there's a lot right now happening in terms of like buzz about planetary health and that interaction between human health and environmental health. And the healthcare industry, you know, is a pretty waste heavy profession for obvious reasons, for sterility and, you know, health and single use items and whatnot. And I'm wondering if you see yourself looking for ways as you go on in the health professions to try to troubleshoot.
That's a great point. I was actually just talking to my mom about this. She's a current practicing nurse, and the point she brought up was everyone thinks of like gloves as single use. That's like the main thing that comes to mind. But she was talking about the pill cups. You have to use a new pill cup every time you crush pills, and you're not allowed to crush more than one pill at a time. So for a patient who uses like 10 different medications per se, that's 10 different cups that you might have to use. And if you want to put them all in one cup, then the nurse could get in trouble for that. So I think if we put new procedures in place to be able to either use recyclable cups or like figure out new ways to have those medications be made, that would be a great way to reduce. It seems so small, but if one person's having 10 cups every 3 hours, that really adds up to single-use plastic a lot being used.
Yeah, very much so. I want to open the floor for any of the other panelists to answer the question if they want to jump in about what brought them to the conversation and their earliest experiences with environmental stewardship before we move on to the next question. So the next question, I think we're going to have, let's see, it's Lydia and David that had said that they would help me out with this one. So what observations or reflections do you currently have about our current state? And there's really been a lot, of course, shifting politically right now in this area, given our administration and policy changes. And we're seeing more and more evidence of the impacts of climate change that Nancy brought up just a few minutes ago too. But can you share how these changes impact your current views and your current actions or approaches to it? I think, Lydia, you were going to join us for that first one, right?
Yeah, so thank you, Alethea. So my, one thing that I wanted to talk about was the drastic call to action that there has been recently for my generation. I think this has been particularly seen within the last 4 or 5 years. During the Trump administration, we really had a large sort of call to action in the members of my generation. So there have been an increase in different uses of social media to communicate about climate change. There have been a lot of different green movements that have been going on. And in addition to that, there have been a lot more rallies going on with different social issues, including climate change. And I think that was one of the things that I really find hope in when it comes to climate change is there has really been this sort of push forward in trying to solve these issues. So personally, in my life as a college student, myself and the sort of circle I surround myself around have been trying to do a lot of individual things that we can do to change our carbon footprint. So a lot of things that my friends and I have been doing have been working on trying to eliminate as much waste as we can from our daily life. I know this year, one of my New Year's resolutions was to only use between 5 and 10 plastic bottles or cans this semester while I'm at school to try and reduce that impact. I know a lot of other students have been switching to plant-based diets as well as trying to reduce the amount of plastic that they consume. But another thing that I have really seen is the use specifically of social media in trying to spread the word on global issues, get more people to go into action and make individual changes, while as well starting to really critique a lot of the social issues that allow for climate change to occur in this way. In my own personal life, I have in the past few years switched to vegetarianism and also have been conducting personal research on climate change, specifically in the Gulf of Maine, which has been a great way not only to educate myself, but also to be able to educate the people in my local community, which has been really helpful just getting that word out. I would like to turn it over to Dr. Mochler.
Thanks, Lydia. I really appreciate that. And I'd like to thank you and all of your classmates and your generation for getting involved, because this is what we need to be doing, is we all need to be getting involved with this and making the changes that we need to make. And in terms of what the current status is, I'm very hopeful in the sense that I think that President Biden and this new administration has sort of gotten the ball rolling about how critical it is for us to be doing something, and not something little, something big about the environment, that we really need to take a hard stand and make some of the sacrifices that Nancy was talking about so eloquently, that we need to be doing that to help with this environment and stop the global warming. I'm hopeful too that I see more and more people becoming convinced that climate change is happening, and it is the result of man-made changes in the environment, our energy consumption. And it's hopeful when you see companies like General Motors saying they're not going to be making internal combustion engines anymore by 2035. It's a slow change. It's very, very, it would be nice if they could do it by 2025, but the fact is that that's a huge change when you really think about what they're planning to do. I'm hopeful because I see so many, at least hybrid cars and new electric cars that are showing up. But we still obviously need to do a lot more. We certainly need to do it on the local level and encourage our local politicians to do what they can do to make those changes. I'm happy to see so many solar panels going up on everybody's homes. We have some on our home, and I'm wondering, if you raise your hand, how many people, that we see on camera have solar panels on their homes, and, reducing and producing it and not waiting for someone else to do the big project of putting up big solar farms. But although we need those obviously too. And then seeing commercial companies. I'm trying to think, we were down going by a car dealership this morning, and they've got a huge bank of solar panels up on their roof. To see a car dealership doing that and understanding the need for generating power, and the work that UNE has been doing. I see Ronnie's down there. And he's certainly had a lot to do with it, as well as Alethea and others at the university, to try to make our buildings as green and energy efficient as possible, as well as all of the recycling that we're doing. So I think that we're moving in the right direction. Are we moving fast enough? That's not entirely clear, probably not. But maybe we can get some momentum going and move faster and faster as we go. Thank you. Alethea?
Yeah, thank you, David. I think it's interesting. There are a lot of different ways in which people can act, and there's a different comfort level for everyone in terms of, how much they can afford for solar or for electric cars, or how comfortable they feel being in that quote unquote activist role. And then for other folks, it's more on a very personal level and in ways that they can personally act. I want to just give an opportunity for any of the other panelists to chime in for a minute or two and add to what Lydia and David have offered up. Nancy, did you want to say something? Just unmute yourself first.
Yeah. You can hear me now. I think we've been talking a lot about these individual things that we can do. We can stop using plastic bags. We can try. I think it's an uphill struggle to get hospitals to switch away from what they see as sanitation methods to something more sanitary in the end. We can walk instead of driving. We can do all kinds of things, but really what we're up against is the enormous consumption of fossil fuels. And a statistic I learned the other day that's not new to anybody else, I'm sure, but 2/3 of the households in Maine supply their winter heat through fuel oil. And that's outrageous. I mean, we use more than, I wouldn't say we use more, but we have a higher percentage of people using fuel oil than any other state in the country. And that includes states like Montana and North Dakota and places that are even colder than we are. We need to move away from that. And we need to have state subsidies, state pushing programs to help people move away from that. I think that's a really big and important thing to do.
Yeah, and there's certainly that push and pull between how much responsibility is in the individual consumer and how much responsibility is there in our government. And that's a never-ending question that we can't get bogged down with trying to find the answer. We need to do both at the same time. That's great, Nancy. Thank you for adding that. I want to just tee up Maureen and Tori for this last question of what hopes do you have for the future of our planet, and what do you want it to look like? What solutions or possibilities do you see available to us, and how can intergenerational action be part of that solution? So I'll turn it over to Maureen first.
What I'd like to see for the future of Earth is life. I'd like there to still be life. All the beautiful things that we have now. How can we do that? We have to have a universal goal, and we have to have global cooperation. And if you don't cooperate, there has to be consequences. We have to have a change in values from profit and greed to sustaining a more than tolerable quality of life for all. I lucked out because Bill Gates just did a CNN interview on this exact topic. And he talked about manufacturing and the issues from that. I know back in the, well, I'm going to date myself, 50s and 60s, I found it disgusting when built-in obsolescence became the way to manufacture. And the amount of waste that I see, starting with my own family, is appalling, and the waste has to stop. We've already hit a little bit on the agriculture and the food issue. And I really didn't realize there was that much pollution from animals, but I should have, because I've been in feedlots. But I don't know that I'm ready to go vegan or eat fake beef. Heating and air conditioning, we've already alluded to that, how we heat our homes. Solar panels, great. I only just moved to Maine, and I was frightened about how I was going to heat my house and cool it, because I came from gas forced air. And I came from a family of, I mean, I've lived in central air conditioning since the 50s, and I'm not ready to give that up. But we have to go to wind and solar. Electric transportation. I've always wondered, why the heck are we working on electric cars? But as I drive down the turnpike, I see all that stuff coming out of the semi trucks. I don't see a change in that. We have to change there. Of course, the cost is the issue for all of this, including the transportation. I think what kept me from considering a Prius, for example, was the cost of replacing the battery. I thought, I can't come up with $5,000 or $6,000. I'm buying a new car this week and feeling guilty because I'm not buying an electric one. Wind and solar power, supposedly, according to Gates, it's got to be at least 80%, with the balance being nuclear for safety and cost and reliability. All generations have to be involved in this, and it has to start in the home and in the schools and then go on. You have to teach children from birth. I mean, I fought with my own family for 25 years about recycling, and I kept saying, hey, look, you have children. Don't you care what's going to happen to them and your grandchildren? We have to invest in the future and not quite so much in the present. I think one good thing is, look how a lot of people around the world came together to quickly come up with a COVID vaccine as an example. Gates thinks we're making progress. I'm not as optimistic. Interesting, I was talking to a 29-year-old yesterday, and we talked about this, and he said, yeah, I think there's a chance for my generation, but I don't think so after that. That was frightening. And something that made me, about 25 years ago, think very seriously about climate change, very similar to what somebody else already mentioned. I watched this absolutely horrible movie called Waterworld with Kevin Costner. It was panned royally. And I won't go into the whole thing, but the very last of it has stuck with me, because the last was just a picture somebody had found a blade of grass. And there was just a picture of this little point of land. The whole rest of the world was completely covered by the ocean. And on top of that little bit of land was a flag that said Mount Everest. And that scared the bejeebies out of me. So we have to change. I want to be hopeful, but the younger generation, I mean, some of us have tried, us old people, but the younger generation really has to help force everyone to make changes. And the bottom line of it is always money. And I'd like to let Tori end us up on the future.
Yeah, so similar to kind of what Maureen talked about, I'd like to see a future just full of life. Talking about that conversation you had where I kind of feel the same way. I'm not sure, like I want to have kids, but I'm not sure that I want to bring them into a world where I'm scared about what it's going to look like when I'm the same age as some of you guys. And I can't even imagine what it's going to look like for generations after that. I don't want to be having to explain to my kids like, oh, this used to be a thriving town and now it's underwater, or this species is gone now, but it used to be really cool. Like, I don't want to have those conversations. I want my kids to be able to experience the earth that I know and the environment that I grew up in. I mean, here in Maine, we're so blessed. We're so lucky. We have so much access and opportunity here. And I just would hate to see that go away. And I think that a lot of what we're talking about looking forward is some really big, really radical changes. And it's been brought up a few times, you know, it's got to start happening faster than it is. And I think that discussions like this are super important. And I really feel like this is the path forward, because I know that a lot of people in my generation feel like alone in this fight. Like no one older than us cares. They've pushed it off and said, it's your problem now, you deal with it. And I think having people like our legacy scholars come forward and say, no, hey, we're behind you, we care, we're beside you, we want to fight, we want to help you see a better future. I think that's amazing. And I think that that is how we're going to get from this kind of blah outlook to one that is much more positive. And I think that if you look back through history, you see a lot of these really big movements that caused really big change being led by younger people, and younger people tend to be the face of these movements. But I think that there's no value that you could put on the knowledge that our legacy scholars here have and the guidance that you guys are able to give to our generation. Nancy brought up the example of heating oil in Maine and how much of a problem that is. And that's one of the conversations I have with my grandparents all the time. They're super worried about, well, we talk about green energy, but what does that mean for me? How am I going to heat my house in northern Maine in the middle of the winter? And I think that sometimes younger generations, we want to just rush forward and we want to get to the final end goal of having green renewable energy, but we don't necessarily stop to think about the people that would get left behind. And I think that our legacy scholars here have seen a lot of these really big changes, and you guys know the fallout that happens that isn't always the best when we have these really big changes. So I think having a really big bridge between the ambition of younger generations wanting to get stuff done and the kind of temperance of you guys from a position of lifelong understanding of how these things play out, I think that's how we got to do it. We got to work together and get to this better future.
Tori, I think that was a superb conclusion to the panel discussion. And I did, Reggie, I'm going to steal your thunder just for one quick minute to just say that what I saw evolving in the conversation so far, it leads into a question that Tom actually had posted in the chat about do any of you as panelists see an intergenerational conflict around this issue? I know on social media I have seen, I think, you know, as humans, a lot of us tend to point the finger in someone else's direction and who's to blame. And, you know, and to follow up on what you were saying, Tori, that it's going to take all of the generations acting collectively. But do others have anything that they want to add to that in terms of where they might see generational conflict around sustainability issues and climate change issues. So I'll open it up to the panelists first, and then I'll let Reggie take it from there. Maureen, do you want to say something first?
Considering what we've seen going on in the world, for example, and in our country in the past 4 years, I have to be careful how I word this. I am concerned, very concerned, that there will be people, and it could be all generations, who absolutely, I mean, we know this, they deny that this is happening, and they will not support changes. And that frightens me. And it's very sad.
Nancy, did you want to add to that? Oh, you've got to unmute yourself.
Okay. I think Maureen is dead on with that. It's absolutely true. There is a whole class of people in this country, and probably in other countries as well, who simply don't care. They want to get as much as they can right now for themselves, maybe for their immediate children, and their grandchildren haven't been born yet, so they can go to hell. But going back to the question of I don't think it's so much conflict between generations as I think it is misunderstandings. And I think it's tempting for younger people to say, oh, you old people, you made this, your nasty habits, forgetting the fact that most of us have been working for 40 or 50 years to deal with it. So the young people say, you old people made this. What can you do about it? Nothing. And the old people say, oh, you young people, you all think you're immortal. You don't even care about this. You know, you go out and you buy a packaged food of some sort and you drop the packaging on the ground. So it's, you know, we're as you said earlier, we look at the other as doing other things and not as all of us being in this together. And I think being in this together is so important. All generations and all parts of the world are in this together.
David, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I don't see an intergenerational problem. I think that where I see the biggest problem, and even deniers aren't the biggest problem. The biggest problem is income inequality, and a vast majority of the world cannot afford to make the changes that we're lucky enough to be able to do ourselves, putting solar panels on or buying an electric vehicle or whatever. They're barely surviving. And, you know, I think someone's already brought up the issue about money and greed. Mm-hmm. And we've got to take control of this and realize that the whole world, like people have said, have got to get together to make this happen. And, you know, some of the countries that are struggling so terribly just to survive, they can't even begin to think about being environmentally, correct.
Right. Maggie?
That's a great point to bring up. Personally, I know as a college student how hard it can be to try to want to be able to be more sustainable, but not being able to afford it. I would have loved for my first car to be like electric or like partially electric at least, but it was a hand-me-down from my aunt who gave it to my cousin, then to me. So I can completely see how it's hard to not point fingers from intergenerationally when a lot of times we should be looking more towards like larger corporations who are the reason or are the biggest producers of waste and like environmental issues. But then we look at ourselves and we're like, well, am I the reason? But it's hard to not blame yourself or blame other generations and instead look towards like the larger producers of these issues.
Right. Lydia, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think there's also a bit of a disconnect from younger people to older generations of an assumption of not being willing to change and sort of like the idea of like, oh, these people created this problem and they're out of touch. Like when that's not really the case, like if you don't allow that bridge of communication, then there's no way we're going to be able to work together. So it's both the need to recognize that everyone is capable of making change, and also the willingness to communicate that is really important. I think this is one of the reasons that this panel is particularly important for this issue.
Yeah, Lydia, I can't agree more. And really that is the reason that I was so excited when Tom broached the subject with me. I view myself oftentimes in my personal and professional life as a little bit of, not a mediator per se, but trying to make bridges and connections between people. So similar to what we're doing here with trying to bring generations together to let both the older folks and the younger folks know that they're not alone in this fight. I think that politically there's some of that needs to happen as well, and finding ways to find common ground and bridge those divides, so that we can all be part of the solution together. With that comment, I'm going to turn it over to Reggie, and Reggie's going to moderate the discussion from the audience and ask for questions in the chat. And
okay, we don't have too many questions, but I do see a hand, and I've seen a hand for a couple of minutes now. So I want to make sure that Pete C, would you like to speak? You need to unmute. Thank you. Can you unmute?
Sorry, Reggie. The people in the audience cannot unmute. I'm sorry.
Oh, so they can't speak.
That's correct. If anyone has a question.
Sorry, Pete. I'm sorry. Put your question in the chat. There haven't been too many questions. There's been tons of comments. And so I think that the first question was about the intergenerational, potentially the friction. And it was good to hear that we really are in this together, and many comments that we can each do something every day. I'm personally a member of the Stoopers Club. I promise to stoop and pick up a piece of trash and dispose of it properly every day. Anyway, some of the other topics that have come up that we may want to discuss among the panelists are some eating habits. One of the comments said that it's harder for older generations to make changes in their eating habits. I'm not sure I agree. What would you like to say about that?
Do you want us to speak?
Speak, yeah, I guess that's all.
I'm unmuted, I guess. As the food authority on the panel, I would say I don't think that's really very true. I have spent a lifetime getting people to change their eating habits, and I've seen a lot of changes taking place in this country. Just to talk about one small thing, the whole business, if you will remember, the whole issue about I think it was dolphins being caught in traps that were set for tuna, and the school children of America mounted a campaign not to eat tuna that had been caught with nets that also caught dolphins. And now you look at a package of tuna and it says on it dolphin free or something like that. So it is possible to make these changes, and it's possible for old people to make these changes. They're not necessarily going to turn to a chili pepper diet, but to turn to a diet that's both more healthful for themselves and more healthful for the environment. That, I think, is a pretty easy thing to bring about with education and with some thoughtful, I mean, there are a lot of organizations too that specialize in bringing healthier food to older people, and healthier food almost automatically means a healthier environment. So I'm hopeful on that score, at least.
Thank you. I think Maureen had her hand up.
I'm not sure I agree with the original comment. You know, I think back, and all my life, I think I've been teased for being cheap or frugal. We didn't throw food out. You used it. I mean, you didn't cook too much, and leftovers, if you had to eat it 3 or 4 times a week, you know, we did that. I don't see my nieces and nephews doing that. I have never seen so much food thrown out, and this going to the store and buying your pineapple and your watermelon and already cut up and put in plastic bags. And don't they understand how bad that is for the environment and for them, and the cost of it? So And that's not true of all young people, don't get me wrong. But I think in regards to food, I think some older people are a bit more careful about food, and certainly not so much waste. I just see so much waste.
And I see that Lydia has her hand up. Unmute, please.
Yeah, so one of the things that this is sort of taking another idea about food and sort of the carbon imprint of it. So I've been vegetarian for about 4 years now. And one of the things that I always have to ask myself is, in terms of meat substitutes, there are a lot of very popular meat substitutes. And I always end up having to ask myself, is this really better for the environment using this processed meat substitute than to actually eat meat, which is something that makes it very complicated to consider about whether something is actually better for the environment if it's a very processed substitute. Whereas if I had a legume for my meat substitute, it would be clearly better for the environment than if I had like a hamburger or something. But it's hard to think about those like more complicated substitutes as to whether it's harming the environment or not.
Thank you. Any other panelists want to speak to that issue?
Alethea has her hand up.
Oh, okay, and Tori too. So Alethea, do you want to go first or?
Sure, I wanted to make a comment about planning, and that in all things with sustainability, what I find, our society is so rush these days, and that true sustainability really comes down to being a good planner in terms of planning your meals out, planning your transportation routes, or finding ways to consolidate trips, so many different things, taking the time to learn how to sort your waste into appropriate recycling and trash bins and compost and whatnot. All of that it takes time and sort of mental attention to those details. And there's so many changes that can be made if we just, take the time. So that's all I wanted to say. Tori, you had something you wanted to add?
Alethea. Yeah, Tori, go ahead.
Yeah, so I actually work at Hannaford as a cashier, and so I see a lot of people planning their meals, going through buying the stuff that they need. And of course, it's super important for all of us to like make the changes that we are able to personally. But I also think we need to remember that it's really hard to get a lot of things without all the extra packaging and stuff. Like there are changes that could be made. I don't need my head of lettuce wrapped in plastic, but you can't necessarily go to like your local Hannaford and get that product without like it's already pre-wrapped. And I think that like that's a thing that we need to focus on too, is that yes, absolutely make the changes in your own home, but also, when you go in, let the manager of the Hannaford know, hey, it'd be cool if I could get this without plastic, because companies are swayed by product and production, and like having people come in and tell them what they want. I think we could make a big difference, but I think it is hard to avoid some of the excess plastic that you get with food. There's tons of people that come in all the time with their reusable bags, and then they're buying, veggies that are wrapped in plastic, and they say to us all the time, hey, I wish I could get this without plastic. And I think if enough of us start putting the pressure on and saying that that's really something we wanted, I think that could be valuable in helping our personal plastic specifically go down a lot.
Thank you, Tori. That's very important, because if we start looking at it, we're using so many plastics every day. And I think the pandemic made it worse because we couldn't bring our own bags. We could probably spend the rest of the time talking about food, but I want to go back to the beginning where there were some comments about education and educating at an early age, which maybe we're not doing. And I did want to have a shout out to Joe Uhas, who said he taught that about greenhouse gases back in the 60s. So I wondered if any of the panelists wanted to talk about education. Yes, Maureen.
I taught junior achievement as a volunteer for 13 years. And one of the lessons was called Our Community. And one of the issues was paying taxes. And there was a man in the community that had to be paid to go around and pick up all the litter. And when the kids realized that I was taking money out of their pocket to pay that man, I said, well, you can avoid this. Don't litter. It's as simple as that. And then I would go to my nephew's baseball games and I would watch all the kids throw all the trash. And I would walk around the stands, picking up all the trash and putting it in a container thinking, well, I don't think these lessons are working, as well as if the parents and everybody else doesn't reinforce this. And that's why I talked about it in my talk, consequences. I only saw people, for example, in Biddeford start wearing masks maybe 9 months into the pandemic, because when the local businesses started saying, no, you will not come in my place of business without a mask. All of a sudden, people started wearing masks.
Nancy, unmute, please.
Yeah, but that brings up another question. And this is kind of interesting because Maureen said that there was a man who went around and picked up all the trash and she collected money to pay him. Once the children started picking up or not dropping the trash, that man was out of a job. And this is something that is really, really tricky in this attempt to switch our economy from one framework to another. We have to remember that we're putting a lot of people out of jobs. It's like the whole spotted owl controversy, in the Pacific Northwest. Yes, the spotted owl deserved to be preserved, and yes, the forest deserved to be preserved. But there were a lot of families that depended on logging for their income, for feeding their children and educating their children about the environment and so forth, and they were out. So I'm not saying one or the other is right, but we just have to keep these ideas in balance.
I think what you're saying is it's a complicated issue.
Very complicated.
We can all do something to head us in the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
Did any of the students want to speak to that, the education part of it or anything else? Tori.
I was lucky enough growing up really early. My elementary school would go to Camp Kiev, and they did a lot of sustainability programming and a lot of composting stuff. That's the big thing that I really remember. And my elementary school actually still, I believe, it's been a while since I've been there, but I still think that they actually compost from the cafeteria. They have tables out and they make that a point to do that. So I totally think that's valid. Having them start early and get that education and go home and say, hey mom, we're going to compost now, like that is super important. And a lot of people in my community, a lot of my friends did go home and start composting with their parents as a result of the experiences that we got through Camp Kiev.
And I wondered if any of the students learned the adage, waste not, want not. Is that something you grew up with as well?
The old Maine expression, use it up, wear it out, make it do or do without. And we should be broadcasting that to the rest of the country. We should be setting an example for the rest of the country.
That's right. Great. Let's see. Do we have time to get into another topic? There was the media, and people haven't really been asking questions. They've been making so many comments that I can't keep up, but not too many questions. So if there is a question, please put it in the chat. Yes, I love the comment about planning as well. EcoMaine comes into the school teaching the kids to recycle. That's a good thing. We need to recycle. And Maureen has a comment.
I was very confused when I moved here. They put in a dumpster for my private street, but they said, nah, we don't want recycling. So I have all these bins and I have to take them to the dump, which I didn't grow up with. I don't understand why in Biddeford I can only recycle 1 and 2. And if I have 3, 4, 5, and 6, I have to put it in a bag and take it over to another town and have them recycle it. Recycling is very confusing. And if you go from state to state and town to town, you know, it is just total confusion. And when I asked, I would like to put a small composter, you know, in my backyard, and the people on my street, who 90% of them are Mainers, because I am so from away, they said, absolutely not. You will not compost on this street. I can't. They won't let me. So, you know, once again, you got to get total buy-in, and that's awfully hard to get.
But we have to keep working at it. And I always say I would never live anywhere where they wouldn't let me hang out my laundry. But that's another issue. Maureen, we can't hear you. I heard you say something, but you didn't.
No, I just made a noise. I mean, I came from a town where 20 years ago they outlawed laundry outside.
Okay. Other comments? Let's see.
Well, can I say one thing to that? When you, all of you students, when you graduate, when you get out into the working world, and when you, some of you may be voting already, run for town office if you're from Maine, because you will have a tremendous, tremendous effect on everything from citizen composting to town energy supplies. It's really important. It took me 80 years to learn that, but do it before you get to 80, okay?
And then I say, go on to become president.
Right.
Don't let that
Yes,
stop.
exactly. Why not?
So Alethea, should I turn it back over to you?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you so much, Reggie.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much to all of the panelists as well. There's some really great conversation, and I can see the audience members just chomping at the bit, wanting to contribute their own thoughts. And I know that Tom has said that there are going to be lots of opportunities for the legacy scholars to continue these conversations, and I think it's going to be rich. And rich dialogue. So I look forward to seeing what opportunities present themselves there as well. So I really just want to say a very warm and huge thank you to all of the panelists. They've been wonderful with their time and their experience and their opinions and thoughts and learned experience and everything. I also wanted to say a huge thank you to Justine Bessette, who, full disclosure, a lot of the questions that we asked today were a result of her work with the Maine Ideas Challenge. And she's doing some really great work with undergraduate students and some of our legacy scholars as well. And I just want to give a big shout out to them, because I think that they've got a project idea that shows a lot of promise. So I look forward to seeing what happens there. But I want to give an especially warm thank you to Reggie for moderating the audience participation, and Kelly Abrams for helping us out with Facebook Live. And of course, Lee, Cody, and Dave Dadiego for their technical expertise. We couldn't have done this without you. Thank you very much. And Tom, thank you so much for bringing me into this group and gathering the group together. And certainly all of our legacy scholars and students that joined us today.
Alethea, this has been tremendous. Thank you so much for leading this today. And I really wanted to express my personal thanks to all of the panelists, our legacy scholars, our students, and all of you, for just everyone in the room for being with us today. I wanted to make note that our next ePower Winter Series presentation will be on March the 12th at 10 o'clock in the morning. And it features Professor of History, Dr. Beth DeWolf, who will speak to us about Victorian hair jewelry. So a big topical change from today, but also I think potentially very interesting.
And thank you all for your comments. There were wonderful comments. I could barely keep up, and people were very engaged. So thank you, all of you and our panelists.
Great. And I just wanted to share very quickly, there's 2 other opportunities if you're associated with the University of New England. We have 2 councils here. One is called the Environmental Council. So if you're faculty, staff, or student and interested in campus sustainability issues specifically, The Environmental Council is a great place to come and share your concerns and be part of the solution. But if you're more interested in sort of the education research pertaining to the intersections of human and environmental health, there's room on the Planetary Health Council, and that really is opened up to anyone in the UNE community and could include the UNE Legacy Scholars. So I just offer those two opportunities as another place in addition to what Tom has planned for programming within the UNE community to continue some of these conversations. So again, thank you all so very much. I really appreciate your time, and yeah, have a great day.
Thank you.